As someone born at the tail end of the 1980s, who grew up in the 90s primarily, engrossed in 80s culture from the video store all the time, I am obviously a fan of John Hughes. So here's a look at our John Hughes collection, both as a writer and a producer and as a director. He was a tremendous force, particularly in the 80s. His career lasted well beyond that, but he never had quite the same cultural impact as he did in the 80s, especially like 84, 85-ish through the very beginning of the 90s with things like Home Alone. He was one of those prolific characters in the movie world because his work was not only very well received and very, very popular, it's created a lasting cultural impact to where the 1980s, which is one of the most iconic decades, is one of those that just doesn't seem to die in pop culture. He is one of those individuals who is partially responsible for some of the look and feel of that culture, and a big part of that was the whole Brat Pack dynamic, and Molly Ringwald and everything with the Breakfast Club, and just going on and on through a lot. John Hughes was a major influence in that regard. And then a lot of course, family classics as well. He was just on a roll for a period of time. This is the John Hughes 5-movie collection on DVD. The nice slipcover. This is a great way if you don't have any of his movies in your collection, or someone wants to explore some of his work. This is a fantastic way to get into it because this pack on both DVD or Blu-ray is very easy to come by these days. It's very, very cheap. You get 5 really good movies: Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, Ferris Bueller's Day Off, She's Having a Baby, Pretty in Pink, and Some Kind of Wonderful. It's a great variety pack too, because some of those are very different movies from each other. And it's a good combination of some of the more common movies and some that are a little less talked about. Pretty in Pink, pretty much anything with Molly Ringwald that's a John Hughes production is a very common knowledge type movie from the time period. Ferris Bueller's Day Off, it's been lampooned and turned into internet memes and things for years. It's very common. Planes, Trains, and Automobiles. Then She's Having a Baby and Some Kind of Wonderful are a little more, I'd say, almost forgotten as far as his work. So it's a great combination. John Hughes 5-movie collection. And then since it's in that pack, we have next up on Blu-ray DVD combo, the Planes, Trains, and Automobiles. This is one of my favorite go-to holiday movies with Steve Martin and John Candy. Always liked classic Steve Martin, and John Candy was a genius. This is a really good combination edition with a bunch of special features. Story of Planes, Trains, and Automobiles. Legacy features on John Hughes. Some deleted scenes, a tribute to John Candy. So all kinds of nice extra features in this edition. Standard Blu-ray DVD combo on the inside. Fantastic movie. Again, I think one of the greatest racing home for the holidays type movies that's become such a cliche, and there's so many movies where somebody is racing home for Thanksgiving or Christmas or a child's birthday or something like that, and all the shenanigans that make up the journey and the troubles trying to get back home. This is one of the best in that trope. It has a lot of the John Hughes hallmarks where it is hilarious, the dialogue is perfect and feels very, very natural, and it of course tugs at the heartstrings. That's something in just about every movie that he has been a part of, where it's never just straight up funny. Throughout the whole thing there is some sort of meaningful, heartfelt message or moment within the feature, and this is definitely one of the strongest. And speaking of John Candy, double feature of Uncle Buck and The Great Outdoors. Both are fantastic movies. Of course, you have a very young Macaulay Culkin in there with Uncle Buck. Both of these are standout features, in particular for John Candy. Some of his most hilarious movies from that time period. Really enjoy both of them. And the John Hughes 5-pack has Pretty in Pink already, so then I have the flashback edition of 16 Candles, because of course you have to have all the Molly Ringwald 80s teen classics. You know, I was moving into my teen years when I first started watching those, so the perfect age bracket for those movies. And then of course the ultimate 80s teen movie, The Breakfast Club, the 30th anniversary edition DVD with a bunch of extra bonus features. The Steelbook Blu-ray. And the retro VHS style Blu-ray release. And I like these. The retro VHS style, they tend to come in two forms. The slightly less interesting, pull this, see right here, like this Call the Conqueror, where it's just a slipcover, and Mill Creek does a lot of these, just a slipcover. It kind of looks like a VHS. It's nothing, you know, it's interesting, it's fun, but these are really, really cool if you have the extra, you know, shelf space to display them, where they actually come in a clamshell that is reminiscent of a VHS. So that's a fun addition. I really like that. And Anthony Michael Hall is, of course, a staple of the 1980s and a lot of John Hughes productions. So we also have, you know, the flashback edition of 16 Candles and the flashback edition of Weird Science. One of the little more on the raunchy side for a lot of the John Hughes titles, Weird Science, but just a very fun take on the Frankenstein type story, very much from the perspective of young teen boys. It's one of those that I feel like if you are a guy growing up, you understand these characters very, very well. And a lot of the overtop ridiculousness, and Kelly LeBrock does a great job. She's very, very funny in this. We have the Weird Science High School Reunion Collection Edition. And I actually have that one on beta. I love coming across 80s movies. I'll pick up just about any 80s movie that I find on Betamax, but I just almost never find any. Just don't see them anymore at all. But one of the few that I have is Weird Science. And then if you watch my last video, you saw this already. The Home Alone Steelbook. This is a Blu-ray DVD combo. Genius movie from John Hughes and Chris Columbus. One of the all-time holiday classics for good reason. And then we have the matching sets. I obviously grew up with that movie on VHS for years and years and years, and I actually don't think I ever owned an older, like, standard DVD. The earlier DVD releases, I had it on VHS forever. Eventually upgraded to the matching editions of Home Alone 1 and 2, so Home Alone and Lost in New York, on DVD and Blu-ray. So these are the matching sets of 1 and 2. 2 is still a fun movie. It's, you know, it's an unnecessary sequel and is nowhere near as good as the original, but it has a lot of funny moments in it. Tim Curry is, I like him in anything he's ever been in. So there are some good points about Home Alone 2. It is a fun movie to rewatch, but it's definitely not the level of classic as Home Alone. But these are good sets to have, and again, these are still very, very common. Home Alone's been released so many times. I don't know if there are any editions out there that are actually, like, hard to grab or expensive, but I like that it has a nice slipcase, and both of the movies on their own individual discs. It's not, you know, shoving them both on one or anything like that. So the matching DVD and Blu-ray combinations for those. And then two movies that are lesser known as far as being associated with John Hughes, where he was either a co-writer of the script or involved in some form. There were a bunch of movies in the 90s that John Hughes was involved in that just didn't have that same classic feel, didn't have that same level of iconic cultural pieces, part of a time period that the way a lot of his 80s stuff did. But there were a few that were still enjoyable where he would work on the screenplay or something like that. One is Robin Williams in the remake of Flubber. Not a particularly amazing movie, but a fun feature in its own right. It's just a silly kind of kids movie. Robin Williams is good in it, at least. So just an okay movie, but it's a fun Robin Williams piece to have. Amanda and I both love Robin Williams. And then if you are of a certain age demographic, this was probably like a VHS staple in a lot of households. They've made a million horrendous sequels. This is one of those franchises where, to me, there's only one movie. But Beethoven. Beethoven, one of those movies that we never owned, but I probably rented it like a dozen times at least as a kid. So this was a very, very fun movie. Going to move these out of the way to make room for another portion of the collection. These you would have seen already if you've been watching my videos. I did a collection about a year and a half ago at this point, 2 years, somewhere around there, of my National Lampoon's vacation movies. And of course John Hughes was one of the forces behind those movies, writing the screenplay, and in particular for the first movie, which is my favorite. I know most people it's Christmas Vacation, but the first one is fantastic. And for that, start off with the CED. Fun release. Really like this format. I wish it was easier to get a replacement stylus for that system. I would have a lot more on the CED format if that was a simpler process. Have that there, and then the older Warner Home Video release on LaserDisc. This is just one of, as with Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, how that is, to me, one of the greatest examples of I have to rush home for the holidays type movies. This, to me, is the ultimate example of taking the family on the road trip movie. Definitely like one of the prime examples of that genre. And then we have the older comedy double feature DVD release of Vacation and European Vacation. European Vacation is not as well liked as Vacation. I love it. I think a lot of it has to do with it just reminds me of a lot of things in my family, and it's also one of those movies that is very iconic, very reminiscent of the time it was made in. It's kind of like if you remember the time frame when that movie represents, it is more enjoyable than I think just looking back if you're much older or much younger. It's one of those that it's very much I appreciate more because I love the time that it's depicting, and it's just great. It's a great one to add on to Vacation, not as good as it. Then one that I think is the most popular, the Christmas Vacation Special Edition. Great holiday movie, a lot of fun. Good special features on just a standard DVD release. Has a lot of great stuff, and this is one that has many releases over the years because it's it's the most popular one. It's kind of a standout. For me, I definitely prefer Vacation to Christmas Vacation. Great Christmas classic, but nothing's past that first one for me. So then, of course, I have Vacation and European Vacation on Blu-ray. I won't talk too in depth about these. I've talked a little bit, but definitely go check out that video where I did the whole collection of the Vacation movies. I'll make sure I put that linked at the end of this video. So that is the last part of my John Hughes collection. He was a force in the 1980s, and that is a decade that I grew up loving and experiencing, again, through the video store, mostly just almost every Friday night going over to the old video store before Blockbuster came into the area and things like that. And a lot of 80s movies were packed full in there, and that's what I would rent all the time growing up. Even though it was, I mostly grew up in the 90s, I mostly grew up watching 80s movies. So John Hughes was a big part of that, and he's just one of those writers who captured a time period and helped create a lot of the look and feel and mentality of the movies that depict a certain decade.